A millionaire family thought money gave them the right to steal everything, even a black man's land. They thought their wealth could silence truth, bury justice, and erase a man's legacy with the stroke of a pen. But what they didn't see coming was that the man they tried to break was the one who would fight back harder than anyone they'd ever met. What would you do if everything you built was stolen from under your feet? How far would you go to fight for what's rightfully yours? This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a man who discovered that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with fists, but with unwavering determination and the power of truth. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next would shake this wealthy family to their core and prove that no amount of money can buy your way out of karma. Marcus Thompson stood on the porch of his modest farmhouse, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across 40 acres of Alabama soil that had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had bought this land in 1952 with money earned from sharecropping. His father had expanded it, and now Marcus had spent 15 years turning it into something special. The peach orchard stretched toward the horizon, heavy with fruit ready for harvest. The small organic farm supplied 3 local restaurants and a farmer's market in Birmingham. It wasn't making Marcus rich, but it was making him proud. More importantly, it was making him independent. That independence was about to become his biggest problem. The white Mercedes pulled into his dirt driveway at exactly 9 a.m., just as Marcus was loading crates of peaches into his truck. 3 people stepped out, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, a younger woman with a briefcase, and someone Marcus recognized immediately. County Assessor Bill Hendricks, a man who'd made no secret of his feelings about black landowners in the area. "Mr. Thompson," the silver-haired man called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "I'm Robert Whitman. I believe you know Mr. Hendricks here, and this is my attorney, Sarah Mitchell. We'd like to have a word with you." Marcus set down his crate slowly. He'd heard the Whitman name before. Real estate developers with deep pockets and deeper political connections. They'd been buying up land throughout the county, turning farms into shopping centers and housing developments. "My land's not for sale," Marcus said simply. Robert Whitman smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, that's what we need to discuss. You see, there's been a discovery about your property taxes." The way Hendricks shifted uncomfortably told Marcus everything he needed to know. This wasn't a social visit. "What kind of discovery?" Marcus asked, though his gut already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Sarah Mitchell opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "According to our research, your family has been significantly underpaying property taxes for the past 20 years. The total amount owed, with interest and penalties," she paused for dramatic effect, "is one time." Marcus felt the world tilt. "That's impossible. My father paid taxes religiously. I've got every receipt." "The assessment was wrong," Hendricks interrupted, his voice sharp. "This property was valued too low for decades. The state's demanding back taxes based on current fair market value." "Fair market value determined by whom?" Marcus's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched into fists. "An independent appraisal commissioned by the county," Robert Whitman said smoothly. "Of course, if you can't pay, well, there are options. I'd be willing to buy the property for enough to cover your tax debt, plus a little extra for your trouble." The silence stretched between them, like a loaded gun. Marcus looked from face to face, reading the script they'd rehearsed. This wasn't about taxes. This was about taking his land, and they'd found a legal way to do it. But Marcus Thompson hadn't survived 43 years in rural Alabama by backing down from bullies. "I'll need to see all your documentation," he said quietly. "And I'll need time to review it with my own attorney." Robert Whitman's smile grew wider. "Of course. You have 30 days to pay, or the county will be forced to seize the property for auction." As the Mercedes pulled away, leaving only dust and the smell of expensive cologne, Marcus realized his real fight was just beginning. Marcus spent the next 3 days buried in paperwork, his kitchen table covered with tax records, receipts and property documents dating back to his grandfather's original purchase. Every number he checked, every calculation he made, led to the same conclusion: something was very, very wrong. His attorney, Janet Williams, was the only black lawyer in the county, And she'd seen this playbook before. "They're not wrong about the back taxes," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose as she studied the assessment. "But they're wrong about everything else. This appraisal is inflated by at least 40%. Your land is good, Marcus, but it's not worth." "So we fight it?" Janet's expression darkened. "We can try. But look at the name on the appraisal company." She pointed to the letterhead. "Whitman Properties Assessment Services. Robert Whitman owns the company that determined your land's value." The room fell silent, except for the tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "That's got to be illegal," Marcus said. "It should be, but Whitman's been careful. The assessment company is technically independent, run by his nephew. And Bill Hendricks has been signing off on property tax adjustments all over the county. They've done this before, Marcus. They just haven't targeted anyone with your profile." Marcus understood. He was successful, independent, and black. Exactly the kind of landowner that made certain people uncomfortable. "How many others?" he asked. "In the past 2 years? 12 families. All African American, all now owned by Whitman Development." The weight of it settled on Marcus like a stone. This wasn't just about his land. It was about systematic theft, disguised as legitimate business. "What happened to the families who couldn't pay?" Janet pulled out another file. "Forced auction. Whitman bought every property for pennies on the dollar, claiming he was the only bidder willing to take on the tax burden. Then he flipped them within 6 months for triple what he paid." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at his peach trees. 3 generations of work, sweat, and dreams. His grandfather had died defending this land from night riders. His father had fought banks that refused to give black farmers fair loans. Now it was his turn to fight. "What are our chances in court?" he asked. Janet hesitated too long. "Honestly, not good. Judge Patterson has never ruled against the county on a tax assessment. And Whitman has connections everywhere. The mayor's office, the county commission, even the state house. So I just give up? Let them steal my family's legacy?" "I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be smart about this. And we need to be prepared for them to play dirty." As if summoned by her words, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice was young, nervous. "This is Danny Webb. I work for Whitman Properties. I think you need to know something about your land assessment." Marcus put the phone on speaker. "What kind of something?" "I was the one who did the actual appraisal. What they submitted to the county, that's not what I wrote. They changed my numbers, made them way higher." Janet leaned forward. "Are you willing to testify to that?" A long pause. I can't. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, and they've got security footage of me doing things I shouldn't have been doing. Personal things. If I talk, they'll destroy me." The line went dead. Marcus and Janet stared at each other across the table. The trap was even more elaborate than they'd imagined, and now they had a glimpse of just how deep the corruption ran. But they also had their first real lead. Word spread through the black community faster than a summer storm. By Sunday, Marcus's church was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and spilling onto the front steps. Pastor Williams adjusted his glasses and looked out at faces filled with anger, fear, and determination. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying the weight of generations, "what's happening to Marcus Thompson is happening to all of us. This isn't just about one man's land. This is about whether we have the right to build something and keep it." The congregation murmured agreement, but Marcus could see the fear in their eyes. Most of these families were barely getting by. They couldn't afford to take on millionaires and lawyers. After service, elderly Mrs. Washington approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "My grandson got one of them assessment letters yesterday," she whispered. "They're saying he owes $43,000 on his mama's old house. That boy's a teacher. He don't have that kind of money." One by one, others came forward. The stories were all similar. Sudden reassessments, impossible tax bills, and Robert Whitman waiting in the wings with a generous offer to buy. But as the community shared their stories, something else began to emerge. Rage. "This is the same thing they did to us in the 50s, said Mr. Carter, a veteran who'd fought in Vietnam. "They couldn't lynch us anymore, So they found a new way to steal what's ours. By Wednesday, Marcus's kitchen had become unofficial headquarters for what people were starting to call the resistance. Janet Williams had volunteered her services pro bono, and they'd been joined by Dr. Angela Davis, not the famous one, but a local college professor with a PhD in economics and a fierce determination to expose corruption. "I've been analyzing Whitman's pattern," Dr. Davis explained, spreading charts across Marcus's table. "He targets properties in a specific sequence. Always starts with isolated families, people who might not have strong community connections. Then he moves to the more established families, the ones with deep roots." "Why that order?" Marcus asked. "Because by the time he gets to the influential families, he's already established legal precedent. Judges have already ruled in his favor multiple times. It becomes routine." Janet nodded grimly. "And each successful theft makes the next one easier. The system starts to see it as normal." "So what do we do?" Marcus asked. Dr. Davis smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "We break the pattern. Instead of fighting alone, we fight together. Instead of reacting to his moves, we make him react to ours." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we don't just defend your land, Marcus. We go on the offense. We investigate every property transfer, every tax assessment, every connection between Whitman and county officials. We make this too expensive and too public for him to continue." The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. They weren't just talking about saving one farm anymore. They were talking about war. "Are we sure we want to do this?" Marcus asked quietly. "These people have money, connections, power. If we come at them and miss, then we better not miss," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see James Morrison, the most successful black businessman in the county. His construction company had made him wealthy enough to fight back, but careful enough to avoid confrontation. Until now. "I've been watching the situation develop," Morrison said, stepping into the room. "And I've been making some calls. Turns out, Whitman's been a little too greedy. He's made enemies in Montgomery. Important enemies. People who'd love to see him taken down a few pegs." He pulled out his phone and showed them a text message. "That's from State Senator Johnson's office. She's been looking for an excuse to investigate rural land grabs. If we can give her evidence of systematic fraud." The room erupted in excited conversation, but Marcus remained quiet. He understood that they'd just crossed a line. This wasn't about his 40 acres anymore. This was about whether an entire community would survive. And Robert Whitman was about to learn that they had no intention of going quietly. 3 weeks into their investigation, Marcus's team had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched far beyond simple tax fraud. Davis had compiled a database of property transfers that showed a pattern of systematic targeting, while Janet Williams had found connections between Whitman properties and half the county government. But it was Marcus himself who found the smoking gun. He'd been reviewing old newspaper archives at the county library, looking for patterns in Whitman's previous acquisitions, when he stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. A small item from 1987, buried on page 6 of the local paper. Local developer Robert Whitman announced his engagement to Patricia Hendricks, daughter of longtime county assessor William Hendricks Sr. Marcus stared at the faded newsprint, his mind racing. Bill Hendricks wasn't just working with Robert Whitman. He was family. And if Hendricks Sr. had been involved in questionable assessments back then, he called Janet immediately. "You need to get down to the courthouse," he said. "Pull every property assessment from 1985 to 1990. Look for patterns." "Marcus, what did you find?" "I found out why Bill Hendricks has been so cooperative. Whitman married his sister 35 years ago." The silence on the other end told him everything he needed to know. Within hours, Janet had pulled decades of records. The pattern was unmistakable. Starting in the mid-1980s, properties owned by black families began receiving inflated assessments at a rate far higher than white-owned properties. Most families had simply paid the higher taxes, not knowing they could challenge the assessments. Those who couldn't pay lost their land to tax auctions where Robert Whitman was often the only bidder. "This has been going on for 40 years, Janet said, her voice shaking with anger. 4 decades of systematic theft, and nobody said anything because the victims were powerless. But Marcus wasn't feeling powerless anymore. He was feeling dangerous. "Get me a meeting with Senator Johnson," he said, "and get me the names of every family who lost land in those auctions. All of them." "Marcus, that's hundreds of families." "Then we contact hundreds of families." By the end of the week, Marcus's kitchen had become a war room. Volunteers worked phones, tracked down records, and compiled evidence. The story that emerged was staggering in its scope and brutality. The Whitman-Hendricks scheme had stolen over $50 million worth of property from black families across 3 counties. Some of the land had been developed into shopping centers and subdivisions. Some had been sold to agricultural corporations. All of it had made Robert Whitman very, very rich. But the most shocking discovery came from an unexpected source. Danny Webb, the young appraiser who'd called Marcus, showed up at his door on Friday night, carrying a cardboard box and looking terrified. "I can't do this anymore," he said, pushing the box toward Marcus. "I've been documenting everything. Every fake appraisal, every bribe, every threat. It's all in there." Marcus looked inside the box and saw hundreds of documents, photographs, even audio recordings. "Why now?" Marcus asked. "Because they just asked me to do it to my own grandmother's house," Danny said, his voice breaking. "She's 87 years old, been in that house for 60 years. They want me to inflate the assessment so they can force her out." "And you said no?" "I said hell no. And then they showed me what happens to people who say no to Robert Whitman." Danny pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a video. It showed the burned remains of a small house, surrounded by fire trucks, that belonged to a guy who tried to organize resistance in the next county over. Happened last month. They're calling it an electrical fire, but Danny shook his head. "There's more. A lot more." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't just fighting corruption anymore. They were fighting something much darker. "We need to get this to the FBI," he said. "Already tried," Danny replied. "Turns out Whitman's got friends there too. But I know someone who might listen. Someone who's been waiting for proof like this for a long time." He handed Marcus a business card. "Detective Maria Santos, Alabama Bureau of Investigation. She's been investigating rural land grabs for 3 years," Danny explained. "But she's never had witnesses willing to come forward, until now." As Marcus looked at the evidence spread across his table, he realized they'd found the weapon they needed to fight back. But he also realized that Robert Whitman was about to become much more dangerous. Because cornered predators don't just give up, they attack. The first sign of trouble came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when Marcus was awakened by the sound of his dogs barking frantically. He grabbed the shotgun he'd started keeping by his bed and crept to the window. In the moonlight, he could see 3 figures moving through his peach orchard, carrying what looked like containers. By the time he'd called 911 and gotten outside, they were gone. But the smell lingered. Gasoline? Sheriff's Deputy Tom Bradley arrived 20 minutes later, took a cursory look around, and shrugged. "Probably just kids playing pranks," he said. "You sure you didn't imagine it?" Marcus bit back his response. Bradley was Bill Hendricks' nephew, and about as trustworthy as a snake in a chicken coop. But the message was clear. Back off, or face the consequences. The pressure campaign escalated quickly. Marcus's insurance company suddenly found irregularities in his policy and canceled his coverage. The bank called his business loan, demanding immediate payment in full. 3 of his restaurant clients mysteriously canceled their contracts, claiming they'd found concerns about his operation. "They're trying to strangle you financially," Janet explained during an emergency meeting. "Force you into bankruptcy so you can't fight the tax assessment." "It's working," Marcus admitted. "I've got maybe 2 weeks before I'm broke." But the community was fighting back too. James Morrison had quietly started buying Marcus's produce at premium prices, distributing it to churches and community centers. Dr. Davis had organized a legal defense fund that was growing by the day. Even people who couldn't contribute money were contributing time, energy, and moral support. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Detective Maria Santos had been investigating Danny Webb's evidence for 2 weeks when she called Marcus with news that changed everything. "We've got enough to file charges," she said. "Fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. But I need you to know, this is going to get ugly. Before it gets better. Whitman's not going to go down quietly. What do you need from me? I need you to keep being visible. Keep fighting publicly. The more attention this gets, the harder it becomes for them to make you disappear quietly." The word disappear sent a chill through Marcus. But he understood. They were past the point of backing down. The next morning, Marcus held a press conference on his front porch. Local news cameras captured him standing in front of his farmhouse, flanked by Janet Williams, Dr. Davis, and a dozen community supporters. For 4 decades, Marcus said, looking directly into the cameras, Robert Whitman and his associates have been systematically stealing land from black families in this county. They've used corrupt tax assessments, fraudulent appraisals, and government connections to steal over $50 million worth of property. He held up a folder thick with documents. We have the evidence. We have the witnesses. And we're turning it all over to state and federal authorities. The story made statewide news that night. By morning, reporters from Birmingham, Atlanta, and even CNN were calling for interviews. But Whitman's response was swift and vicious. Marcus woke up Thursday morning to find his peach orchard had been destroyed. Every tree cut down, every irrigation line severed, decades of work reduced to stumps and debris. A note was tacked to his front door. Last warning. Standing in the ruins of his family's legacy, Marcus felt something break inside him. Not his spirit. That was stronger than ever. But his willingness to play by their rules. They want a war, he said to Janet, who'd rushed over as soon as she heard. They're about to get one. But as Marcus surveyed the destruction, he didn't see the figure watching from the tree line, taking photographs. Robert Whitman's final gambit was about to begin. The destruction of Marcus's orchard backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating the community, it galvanized them. By Friday morning, volunteers were streaming onto his property, not to rebuild the trees, but to document every piece of evidence. Dr. Davis coordinated the effort like a general planning. A campaign. Every cut tree, every severed irrigation line, every tire track. We photograph it all. And we get it to Detective Santos immediately. But Marcus had a different plan brewing. He'd spent Thursday night reviewing Danny Webb's evidence one more time, looking for something the others might have missed. What he found was a pattern within the pattern, a series of property acquisitions that didn't make financial sense unless you understood their true purpose. Look at this, he said, spreading a map across his kitchen table Friday evening. Janet, Dr. Davis, and James Morrison leaned in to study the marked properties. Every single one of these acquisitions connects to this. Marcus pointed to a large tract of land running along the river. Whitman's been buying a corridor. Question is, why does he need a 2-mile strip of riverfront property? Dr. Davis studied the map more closely. That's the proposed route for the new interstate bypass, the one that's supposed to bring casino development to the area. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. How much would that land be worth if the casino development goes through? Morrison asked quietly. Conservative estimate, $200 million, Dr. Davis replied. Marcus felt a cold smile spread across his face. So all this, the fake assessments, the tax schemes, the intimidation, it's not just about stealing land, it's about positioning himself for the biggest payday in county history. But only if he can acquire the complete corridor, Janet added. If even one property owner holds out, the whole plan falls apart. Marcus finished. Because you can't build a casino development with gaps in your land ownership. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at his destroyed orchard. Somewhere in those ruins was the key to everything. What if I told you I know which property is the keystone? He said quietly. The one piece Whitman absolutely has to have, but hasn't been able to acquire? How could you know that? Morrison asked. Marcus turned back to face them, his expression serious. Because it's mine. This property sits right in the middle of his corridor. That's why he's been so determined to get it, and why he escalated to violence when legal means didn't work fast enough. Dr. Davis was already pulling up property records on her laptop. Marcus is right. Without his 40 acres, Whitman can't connect his northern and southern parcels. The casino development becomes impossible. So what do we do? Janet asked. Marcus had been thinking about that all day. We make him an offer he can't refuse. Before anyone could ask what he meant, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized. Detective Santos. Marcus, I need you to listen carefully, she said, her voice tight with urgency. We just intercepted communications that suggest Whitman is planning something drastic. You need to get somewhere safe. Tonight. What kind of something? The kind that makes problems disappear permanently. How fast can you pack? Marcus looked around his kitchen, at the evidence scattered across his table, at the faces of people who'd become his family in this fight. I'm not running, he said quietly. Marcus, this isn't the time for heroics. This is exactly the time for heroics. Because if I run now, he wins. And if he wins here, he wins everywhere. Marcus hung up the phone and turned to face his team. Detective Santos says Whitman's planning something final. Which means we're out of time for the careful approach. What are you thinking? Morrison asked. Marcus walked to the window again, looking out at his property one last time. When he turned back, his face held the calm determination of a man who'd found his purpose. I'm thinking it's time to give Robert Whitman exactly what he's been asking for. A face-to-face meeting to discuss the sale of my land. Marcus, that's suicide, Janet protested. No, Marcus replied, pulling out his phone to make a call. That's justice. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with a wind that cut through the bare branches where Marcus's peach trees used to grow. He stood on his porch at exactly 10 a.m., wearing his best suit and waiting for the white Mercedes that would deliver his fate. Hidden throughout the property, Detective Santos and her team had positioned themselves with cameras and recording equipment. James Morrison sat in his truck at the end of the driveway, ready to call for backup if needed. Janet Williams waited at the courthouse with a stack of legal documents, prepared to file charges the moment they had recorded evidence of criminal activity. But Marcus stood alone on his porch, exactly as he'd promised Robert Whitman he would. The Mercedes arrived precisely on time, carrying the same 3 passengers as before: Robert Whitman, his attorney Sarah Mitchell, and County Assessor Bill Hendricks. But this time they weren't smiling. Mr. Thompson, Whitman said as he approached the porch. I understand you're ready to be reasonable about your situation. That depends on your definition of reasonable, Marcus replied calmly. Whitman's laugh was cold. Let me explain reasonable to you. Your orchard is destroyed. Your business is ruined. Your legal bills are mounting. You have exactly 0 options left except bankruptcy and foreclosure. Or I could sell to you, for what I'm willing to pay. Yes. Marcus nodded slowly. And what exactly are you willing to pay for 40 acres of prime riverfront property that sits in the middle of your casino corridor? The silence stretched between them like a wire under tension. Whitman's face had gone very still. I don't know what you think you know. I know everything, Marcus interrupted. The fake tax assessments, the bribes, the intimidation, the planned casino development that requires every piece of property in a 2-mile corridor along the river. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Whitman. I also know about the $200 million you expect to make once the interstate bypass is approved and casino development begins. Whitman opened the folder, and his face went pale as he saw copies of internal Whitman Properties documents, financial projections, and correspondence with casino developers. Where did you get this? From someone who decided that helping you steal land from black families wasn't worth his soul, Marcus replied. Denny Webb sends his regards, by the way. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. These documents were obtained illegally. Actually, they were obtained by a whistleblower cooperating with a federal investigation. Marcus said pleasantly. Detective Santos has been very thorough. As if summoned by her name, Detective Santos emerged from behind the house, her badge clearly visible. Robert Whitman, she said formally. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and violation of civil rights under federal law. But Whitman wasn't finished. As Santos approached with handcuffs, he turned back to Marcus with pure hatred in his eyes. You think you've won something here? This land will never be worth anything to you. I'll make sure of that. I'll tie you up in legal battles for decades. Actually, Marcus interrupted, you won't. He pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Whitman's voice filled the air, clearly audible. Let me explain reasonable to you. Your orchard is destroyed. Your business is ruined. That's a confession to criminal conspiracy, Detective Santos noted helpfully as she applied the handcuffs. Recorded with your full knowledge and consent, since Mr. Thompson informed you he was recording this conversation for legal purposes. Whitman's face twisted with rage. I never consented to. Marcus pointed to a small sign he'd posted on his front door that morning. Notice, All conversations on this property may be recorded for legal purposes. Been there since yesterday, Marcus said calmly. You walked right past it. As Detective Santos led Whitman toward her car, the defeated man turned back one last time. This isn't over, he snarled. Marcus walked down from his porch and stood face to face with the man who tried to destroy his life. You're right, he said quietly. This isn't over, because now we're going after every family whose land you stole, every fraudulent assessment, every corrupt deal. We're going to tear apart 40 years of systematic theft, and we're going to make sure every stolen acre gets returned to its rightful owners. You don't have the money for that kind of fight. Marcus smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a genuine expression of joy. Funny thing about casino development rights, he said. Turns out they're worth a lot of money to the right buyers, especially when those buyers are interested in ensuring that development happens ethically, with proper compensation to all affected landowners. He handed Whitman a business card. Marcus Thompson Development Partnership. We'll be handling all future riverfront development in this area, fairly and legally. As the police car pulled away with Robert Whitman in the back seat, Marcus stood in the ruins of his orchard and felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. The land was still his. Justice was finally coming. And an entire community had learned that sometimes, when you refuse to back down, the bullies are the ones who break. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the same spot where his destroyed peach orchard had been, watching a very different kind of planting. Community volunteers worked alongside professional landscaping crews, installing the first phase of the Thompson Community Garden, a project funded by the Marcus Thompson Development Partnership's first major contract. The casino development had moved forward, but under very different terms. Instead of one man profiting from stolen land, the development now included fair compensation for all affected landowners, job training programs for local residents, and a community benefit fund that would support education and small business development for decades to come. Detective Santos approached, carrying a thick folder of documents. The last of the Whitman appeals was denied yesterday, she announced. He'll serve a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. Bill Hendricks got 12 years. And the civil settlements are starting to pay out. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. Across the garden, he could see Mrs. Washington directing the planting of a memorial rose garden, dedicated to the families who'd lost their land over the past 4 decades. Her grandson, the teacher who'd been targeted by Whitman's final scheme, was helping plant roses alongside children from the local elementary school. 43 families got their land back so far. Santos continued. Another 67 received financial settlements. And the new county assessor's office has implemented oversight procedures that should prevent this from happening again. Should, Marcus repeated. Nothing's ever guaranteed, Santos acknowledged. But what you did here, it's become a model for other communities facing similar schemes. I've gotten calls from 5 other states asking for copies of our investigation files. Dr. Davis joined them, brushing soil from her hands. She'd taken a leave of absence from the college to coordinate what was now being called the Rural Justice Project, an effort to identify and combat systematic land theft operations across the Southeast. Just got off the phone with Senator Johnson, she reported. The federal task force on rural land fraud is being made permanent, with a dedicated budget. They're calling it the Thompson Act. Marcus felt a flush of pride, but also responsibility. His name would now be associated with the fight against injustice, which meant he could never stop fighting. Any regrets? Santos asked, nodding toward the space where his peach orchard had once stood. Marcus considered the question seriously. He'd lost his trees, his original business, months of sleep, and very nearly his life. But in return, he'd gained something more valuable than any crop he could have grown. My grandfather used to say that the best crop a man can grow is justice, Marcus replied. Because that's the only harvest that feeds the whole community. As the sun set over the community garden, casting long shadows between the newly planted rows, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd started as a simple farmer, concerned only with his own 40 acres. But sometimes, life forces you to become something larger than yourself. The white Mercedes was long gone, replaced by pickup trucks and work vans belonging to community members. The threats and intimidation had given way to cooperation and hope. And the man who'd once stood alone on his porch facing impossible odds, now stood surrounded by a community that had learned its own strength. "What's next?" Dr. Davis asked. Marcus smiled, looking out over the garden, where children played between rows of vegetables that would feed local families, where elderly residents shared stories of their own battles against injustice, where young people learned that sometimes the system can be changed, but only if you're willing to fight for that change. "Next, we keep planting," he said simply. Because Marcus Thompson had learned the most important lesson of all: the seeds of justice, once planted, grow into forests that can shelter entire generations. And the harvest never ends. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when one person decides they've had enough. Marcus Thompson's fight continues today through the families who've reclaimed their stolen land, the communities that have learned to organize against corruption, and the reminder that no amount of money or power can defeat the simple truth: what's right is right, and what's wrong must be challenged, no matter the cost.